Hello, people of Earth. Welcome back to another Parallel Perception podcast with Lujan Matus. I am your host, David Bernard. Unfortunately, my co-host, Blaine Raylek, is not here today, but we're still going to see what we can get into. So if you've been following the podcast for a while, you know that we talk about wild and crazy stuff. This is about the human condition. This is about spirituality. It's about evolving along our own paths. It's about the questions that come up along the way and the things that we struggle with. And if anybody has any questions that they'd like us to entertain during the podcast, feel free to email us at info@parallelperception.com, or you can use the questionnaire on Spotify. All right, Lujan, today I want to talk about some crazy things. So a long time ago, I read a book called The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. And this book it's like esoterica. It's been a while, and so it's hard to kind of quantify everything that they get into. But what they talk about is how God entered into manifestation and what that looks like in terms of how it unfolds into reality over time. And so it talks about like the different aspects of God. It talks about the different aspects of planetary systems and how they unfold, as well as what all living things go through in terms of their development along time. And I liked a lot of aspects of this book, and a lot of them seem to align with Gnosticism and some of the things that you talk about, and that's what was attractive. But it's also written in a language that isn't necessarily easy to understand, so you kind of have to, measure it against other things that you believe or that you know. But the concept of evolution, it's interesting because this was written around the beginning of the 20th century, so 1900, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something like that. And I think the Origin of Species was written in the mid 1800s. So evolution, I don't know how broad scope words like evolution and epigenesis and all those things were, but it's at the root of what this book is all about. And so what it basically says is that we all go through a period of evolution where we are unconscious. This might be like mineral life or elemental life or something like that. And then eventually you go as far as you can within that realm of experience until the next thing happens where you become aware of your existence, but it's mostly an internal thing. Then eventually you become aware of other. And then in that world, there comes community, and this continues to unfold. So the next phase that they're saying in the human evolution would be something like a demigod, where we're still largely physical creatures, but we open ourselves up into a place where we have unique powers, let's call them. And we talked a little bit about powers in our last podcast, so that's part of what I wanted this conversation to describe. But I guess I'm looking in part for whether or not you can validate any of these concepts in terms of evolution being like that it's structured in almost a mathematical way where we're given experiences over vast periods of time that sort of enable us to have an experience that informs us about certain aspects of the divine through things that aren't necessarily divine at the face. When you're looking at a rock, you don't think of necessarily that it has consciousness or that it has experience or that it has anything like that, unless you go really deep and esoteric along those lines. So my question for you does this line up with your point of view of what existence is, that evolution is something that is kind of tiered in an organized mechanical way, that there's an A and then there's a B and then there's a C part of our experience, and that the goal is sort of to maximize experience, really, and to witness manifestation through all of the different ways that we can experience it, whether that's as a food, fungus, or animal.
Okay, what I want you to do for me is that I want you to interject exactly what you realize when I'm putting something forward in terms of my own experience, so that we can have so I can remember every single step that you just said. But the first thing I'll say about the Rosicrucians, in terms of how many years ago? It was 200 years ago, 300 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
200,
Now, Okay, when we look at powers, when we look at universal consciousness, when we look at the prospects or the abilities of man expanding into a godlike representation of their consciousness, this is the first thing we've got to look at. So when we go back to the Rosicrucians, and was it Rosicrucians, wasn't it?
Yes.
We were talking about about things started off as a one-celled organism which advanced into something else. Now, I think we'll just start with human consciousness and then look back at that in terms of reference point, because what they've given is the absolute reference points of what will yield to human consciousness, instead of saying we've evolved from one state to another state to another state until we become a chimpanzee, and then, or an ape, and then we become a human being via being maybe manipulated genetically, or we just evolved genetically. I'm not going to put either one of real or not inside of that, even though I know the truth of it. But when you look at this, powers of discernment in terms of what is power, what is discernment, what is an open heart, what is harmonizing with the universe is the question that we've really got to ask in terms of what they put forward in terms of the secret mechanisms that's hidden in Rosicrucian consciousness in terms of realization, and then look at the Gnostics in terms of what is the secret in the systems of the Gnostics. Why were they so hard to control, and why were they shunned by religion? Because they were hard to control, because they had specific information which would make man godlike anyway. So we have a right to be godlike. We've got a right to be in control of our environment. We've got a right to be as big as we can conceive we can be, as long as we don't do harm and not disharm, not to be in a state of non-harmony with the universe. As long as we stay in harmony with the universe, everything's fine. If we go out of harmony with the universe, then whatever we feel that we can do can be then reduced into a low form of power that is probably the expression of the people on the planet at the moment, because they've been reduced to a field of perception which has got to do with how their spirit has fallen to a certain degree, and then we're trapped within social engineering. This is very simple to understand. Now, just say we were looking at a rock and the consciousness of a rock. Now, the rock or the consciousness of a rock is a holographic image that we've manufactured to give reflection upon our inability to go beyond the scope of the three-dimensional world and be holographically multidimensional in terms of our aspects of consciousness. And the reason why we're limited within our three-dimensional world is because we've ascended from what we're really meant to be into what we've been controlled to be. In terms of, like, I'm going to say something. I am not white, you're not black. I'm not white, you're not brown. I'm not white, you're not yellow. This is the divisionary tactic which separates people into creeds and causes a certain amount of conflict because of being in a perceived state that we believe is different from every single human being, and we know that's not true. Yeah, because when I see Kate, your wife, she's got brown skin. She's a human being. I don't see a brown-skinned person. I see an open-hearted person. If I look at you, you're white. I would say, no, I don't see white. I see an open-hearted person, a vulnerable human being that needs to be understood, needs to evolve beyond their particular perspective. I'm exactly the same. No difference. Now we've got to look at that's a pre-programmed edifice which has trapped us into division. Division is the problem. Unification and unity is the prospect of our universal consciousness harmonizing with the universe in terms of the power that we believe that we can yield, that is appropriate in comparison to universal law. You get me, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, if I look at a rock, and the rock is an inanimate object, is the inanimate object, does it have consciousness? Of course it do. Of course it do. Of course it does. Because that's part of our three-dimensional world that we've developed as human beings. You've got to show everybody that drinking bottle when you go back, okay? It's so big. Now, so when we look at this, if I look at a rock, if I do certain things, I'm asking my reality to yield to me via the prospect of my command over my located consciousness, which is full of light, or my mind stream. Now, my mind stream there are forms of mind stream. The first mind stream: internal dialogue, emotional dilemma, emotional entanglement, karmic entanglement, and that keeps us held in a position that we can't escape, because we're not taught that the mind doesn't exist, and neither does the emotions. Even though I've taught being, knowing, and not doing, and the mind is the thief, and the emotions are the ghosts that we've got to bring into a foundation of completeness where they're not operational because they're not necessary. So if they're not operational and if they're not necessary, what do we do with our emotions? What do we do with our mind? We stop our mind and allow our mind stream to become not this minute mind, but become the next level of mind, which has got to do with the prospect of moving into powers. So we don't want powers. So then we destroy the capacity of ourselves to have powers before we're mature enough to handle it. So we leave that alone, because that'll integrate later on when we expand. So don't go there, because there is dangerous, because that will trap us into a never-ending loop of a mind stream, which is so powerful and it looks like it's limitlessness. It's got limitlessness within it. No, it's not. It's limited. So we let go of the powers. Like I say, I let go of my powers. I don't tell people the powers I've got. I put them behind. That's it. I don't want anything to do with them. And what does happen then? Then you got your heart stream. Now your heart stream, you receive people, you note that you receive people. It's part of the evolutionary process to integrate in terms of becoming empathically in tuned, inclined towards the harmony between, you don't want to hurt, you want to support the people around you. You don't want to think bad things about them, because if you think bad things about them, that started with you, it doesn't start with them. So we're very responsible who we become in terms of what we consciously do to somebody else inside of ourselves, because that is breaking the general premise or the rule that don't harm your neighbor. Because if you harm your neighbor, you harm yourself. And you let that neighbor know that neighbor will learn to harm you through their own reflection. And then it's warfare again. It becomes a creed-like consciousness in terms of it's us against them. You understand? So then there's conflict. So that's a karmic entanglement. That won't release us from our three-dimensional world. So we get rid of we subdue and stop the internal dialogue. Then it becomes, the mind stream expands. And then we open up our heart, then we're aware of the power of our communication. And if powers appear, we have to ignore those powers, because that mind stream is a circus. We don't want to be caught in that circus. Now, then you've stopped the small mind stream, and you've stopped the small entanglement between yourself, and you stop fighting with yourself. So stop fighting with yourself. You sit still. I've stopped fighting with myself. Why have I been fighting with someone else inside of myself? Because I'm still fighting with myself. So that stops. And then you realize, okay, that person I can't integrate with. There's not harmony. You make the choice. It's the intelligent choice to make. Okay, that person doesn't fit with me. I can't be with that person because they're not on the same wavelength. You can try, and if it doesn't work, move on. So you don't want that type of conflict. Now, so then we go to the next level. You've got no mind. Your mind stream has expanded into the powers that are made available to you because you're empathically inclined. You've got other people's mood coming inside of you, and you interpret that, you speak to them. That's the next level of communication. I've got to write about the next level of communication in another book, but we got to a certain level in the power of emptiness. Now, so we look at this, then you subdue your feelings. You don't want to have anything to do with those feelings. You don't want anything to enter that's going to disrupt you, even though you love your environment, you love the people around you, you're compassionate, you're grateful, you're in a state of gratitude. But that gratitude is prompted by the world yielding to you, because you're not having an emotional dilemma with the world. So you still got a karmic entanglement. So we take that feeling away. Once we've got that feeling away, the true mind will expand into universal mind. Once it expands into universal mind, then you become you become the person you're really meant to be. You're meant to be in control of your environment. You're meant to be empowered by your ability to see what needs to be done, and you become a very, very interesting individual, because you're not enslaved anymore, and you can start to see the world as it is. And there's a biblical saying. What is it? When you notice what you're meant to notice, the world becomes a wonder, because you're free from the entrapment. I don't know exactly what the saying is. If you can remember that, remind me. And so we look at this. So then our mind stream then our mind stream becomes full of white light. Once our mind stream becomes full of white light and we don't have an emotional response, and we're totally harmonized in terms of the power that's presented to us, in terms of what's meant to happen because of the harmonization with the universe. So we start to command from a godlike perspective who we're really meant to be. And don't take that out of context, guys. Godlike prospect of who we're really meant to be. If I stare at a rock, that rock will yield to me. So is the rock part of the evolutionary process, or is the rock just part of the three-dimensional edifice that we're concentrated on, and we separate ourselves from the rock? Watch a rock for 5 hours, it will yield to, will start to bend, it'll start to move, and things you'll see that rock is part and parcel of your consciousness. So the teachings are that you concentrate on something until it yields to you. And what does that really tell you? The three-dimensional world is waiting to be broken into, so it will yield to us and show us that the three-dimensional world is not real. What's real is beyond that three-dimensional cage, or that prison cell that we've manufactured for ourselves. The Rosicrucians are right, but they put it in a way you can't really understand it. Because it's not the consciousness of a rock that becomes a human being. It's a human being which has created that rock, and they've set forth a labyrinth of inquiry that if you inquire the wrong way, you'll see it as Newtonian. You'll see it as exactly what they say, because that's what we've been taught. So if that's exactly what we've been taught, how can we yield to that? We yield to that. So the three-dimensional world becomes solid for us because we yield to that premise. And if we yield to that, the Rosicrucians will know exactly who we are. But if we don't yield to that, and they've done this 200 years ago, and we have different technologies. We have so much at our fingertips now in terms of transformational edifices like this computer. So you say, well, okay, I don't believe what they've said, but I understand what they've said. So if I understand what they've said, that means my consciousness is not tricked into the edifice of the three-dimensional world around us, and I've broken into what the secrets are that they put forward, but the secrets are put forward in such a way that it works with social engineering. Because only when you learn that you can break into a rock by not yielding your consciousness to that rock as a three-dimensional element which is separate from you, or you break into that rock because it is you. So then when we look at this, what they've done is there are levels of consciousness that if you can't break into those levels of consciousness by breaking the edifice of social engineering consciousness, there's no way in the world that they'll see that you're even worthwhile even talking to. Because if you don't have the capacity to break through with the information they've given, and then unlock the keys to that, because you can see the keys to that's very easy to unlock, because everybody believes exactly what they've said, because they've set forth the parameters of consciousness. Can you break into that? And if you can't break into it, they know who you are. But if you can break it into it, they'll notice. And if they notice you, then they'll come and give you a secret handshake and say, come on in.
That's really interesting.
See, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. One of the things that I noticed in the Power of Emptiness is that's the first book that is really kind of written as like a allegory, or not that it's a fable. There's no animals. Well, there's a donkey, but outside of that, it's a story. You know, it's not being conveyed in the way of these are Luhan's experiences and memories, and you know, maybe you use language to describe it in a way that is fictional characters and this and that. But the Power of Emptiness, it, you know, you're talking about the Mangrove Grove Master, which is literally a story that's being told, and the quality of the experience of reading that book is very different than the rest of your books. All of your books have so much to offer, and every time you read it, you know, you pick up something else that you didn't notice last time, which is interesting in of itself. But what I found is that when you tell a story in a way, it's sort of, I almost feel like for the first time I understood why religion and spirituality are treated with myth. That the hero's journey is told as a myth, because what it's tapping into is your imagination as opposed to your mind. You're not trying to understand something. You are traveling with the author through their imagination, and you're kind of entangled in that way. But by connecting with imagination, that is very much an open state, whereas trying to understand something is a very contracted state. And so it ends up moving through corners of your being that it wouldn't normally have access to, and you glean things from it that you didn't notice it happening. And so when you're describing the things like the cosmic conception and a lot of esoterica and the way that it's written very cryptically, I think that most people approach material like that, including myself, as I'm trying to find the nuggets of truth. This is definitely something that Christianity does, where it's like, this is the word of God, this is the truth of God. Actually, probably lots of religions do that, where their book is the book that is like all of the recorded truths, and once you have it, you can possess it. And by possessing it, you're locking your understanding into a state that isn't necessarily full. And it, like you said, it's almost like a test. That if you're taking it at face value, then we understand the mind of the person that is exploring the material and where they might be along their path. But if you find the truth, even Jesus talks about, that he speaks in parable specifically because it allows people kind of further down's maybe not the right word, but more in an infancy of spirituality, to be able to get something out of what he's saying, but that there are much deeper truths contained within the parable that, for those with eyes to hear, for those with eyes to see, for those with ears to hear, is available. That's very interesting, and not something that I've necessarily heard anybody put out there like that.
Yeah. Now, the power of emptiness, they're parables. Obviously, they're parables, but they're everything that has ever happened to me put in story form, like you say, so people can absorb that story form and then come upon their own realizations through that story form, instead of saying exactly like the other books, exactly what I experienced and given the exact pathway, but I've given an indirect pathway through the parables that are inside Power of Emptiness. But that's the first representation, and now we've hit on the second representation of that book, because you have to go beyond that book. But I believe maybe we should go beyond that book through interviews instead of me writing another book, which stresses everybody out because I do it in 4 months, and they're writing everything down. So when we look at this, we get to the real mind stream. The mind stream, the true consciousness of your mind stream. You have to have techniques where you can fill yourself with light, fill your mind with light, and then, like the Tibetans say, it's the universe is all mind. But how is it all mind? How do we understand it's all mind? Is because we have to let go of different qualities of mind to get into universal mind, to expand in that, and we have to hit the frequencies that is necessary to coordinate both hemispheres, so you become absolutely adept in terms of the real potential of human consciousness. But the real potential of human consciousness cannot be accessed if we're divided. If we say, like I said, I'm not white, you're not black, I'm not white, you're not yellow, I'm not white, and you're not brown. If you take this and you just really look at this, we've been conned, and we've been conned to stay into a lower state of consciousness, and that means with it that we're working for somebody who does have the secrets but don't want to yield their ability to set us free, because they've been so used to overpowering us. So they're in the second stage of mind, of open mindfulness, in terms of the powers that can be displayed and the path that can take them down to ruin, because they're using cities, they're using powers to control a mass of souls, and they've got no right to do this. And this mass of souls has to be given the right to understand, to explore what real consciousness is, and that will free them from their bondage towards the cities or the powers they've gained by separating themselves into a creed that's above and we're below. This has got to stop completely. So when we look at this, they are caught in, I've progressed to this level of universal mind, and I've found powers. They start controlling everybody, and that's what's happened. So we've got to understand that they've made a mistake. They've gone down a pathway which is never ending, because you imagine there's 114 major chakras, 7 chakras in the middle of our body to the top of our head. There are nadis, which are 175,000 nadis and split in half inside. What sort of powers have they accessed, and what aren't they willing to let go of in terms of the radiant field of energy that they've accessed, which is never ending? And it seems like the last 300 years has been never ending, and everything's been stopped for us, and everything keeps going for them. This is wrong. Absolutely wrong. So we've got to make this statement and say, well, everything is not being done correctly. How can we recorrect our path? Is it get rid of the small mind, get rid of the small feeling, get rid of your mind completely. Let it go into the field of power, and reduce yourself to not applying yourself to those powers. That's the second mind that appears. And then you've got to subdue your feelings, so you're not swayed here. So your mind field can become universal mind, and the mind stream is purely encapsulated within the universal harmony. You don't have emotions there. You just what you really need to do. Your body's completely put asleep, your mind's completely awake. You do not feel anything from that point, but you've got universal mind. You've got the mind of God that spreads to the limits, only the limits that you apply to yourself. Yeah, and this mind stream is exactly where those original beings haven't gone. They've got caught into power, in the play of power, and they become used to it, and they possess that power, and conversely that power possesses them. And then the outcome of that, who do we control, and how do we keep our power intact, and what do they do with that? We've got to stop everybody else from growing so we can be in control. And who's we? Yeah. The we is the controlling, the people who control this world, that won't let go of what they need to let go of to grasp what needs to be grasped next, so we can all evolve. So what's happened is that the world has been divided into two sections, and there's a tremendous emphasis on keep separating that, so until the have-nots and the haves appear completely, so they have absolute total control. This can't happen. We've got to wake up. We've got to wake up. And if we can wake up and say, I have the possibilities to be way beyond what I expect, and we all deserve this. And nobody should be scared of their power. Whoever says, I'm scared to express my power, no, you just don't understand that the power you got is limited. That's why you're scared of it, because it damages things, because the world consciousness won't support that type of power that you say you're scared of. So we have to go beyond the small powers to a larger power of releasing ourselves from our entrapment, releasing everybody else from their burdens, in terms of getting everyone to understand that the possibilities are way beyond what they expect. And it's not arrogant to say we are gods limited within the three-dimensional realm of consciousness, because it's been designed that way through conflict instead of harmonization. I'm being tough today, aren't I?
I don't think so. I think these are really relevant to the state that the world is occupying right now. So one of the things, to circle back to the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, one of the things that they express is that actually when God began manifestation, that all of the realms that we can occupy, and I think another way to say that maybe is the dimensions, is that the highest were made first. I guess you could think of it as like if God was a physical thing that first cut himself in half, and then in quarters, and then so on and so forth. And so the higher realms of dimensions came in.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you. Let's look at this. Okay. You've already divided universal consciousness into dimensions, where you're already saying there's a framework of high and framework of low. That plays into the engineering process, that you've got to get to the high, and the high still exists. Is that we've created a hierarchy here which we can't escape from. So even when you look at the myth that's in religions, it is truly a myth, because they've given us a story to believe in that's unyielding, in terms you can't have any other idea because you're not godly, or you're not a Christian, or you're not this, or you're not that, you're not Taoist, you're not Buddhist. But the thing is, or you're not Muslim or anything like this. We've got to break away from that, because those divisions in terms of the ideas that the highest then becomes the lowest. But how did the lowest appear? Because somebody was given that information and then misused that information, we're caught in a trap. So who brought the highest consciousness in, and how come a certain amount of people realize we can still keep control of the masses, and we're going to keep doing this and still keeping instilling different ideas, which represents a lower form of consciousness, a higher form of consciousness, to this, to this, to this. But it's all surrounded like, we're rich, we're financially rich, you have to work for a living. The system that's been developed and what we've been trained to be used to is just like a rat in a maze. We're no different. We think this is our reality. No, it's not. There's more to our reality than the rat maze which has been created for us. I think I've had too much coffee.
What I was actually trying to get to is that
yeah. Excuse me, David. I love you.
No, I love you too, Luhan. Is that is how it's presented. It's very much presented like this hierarchy. I think they even use that word when they're describing the logos and all of the different segments between.
Because they're testing you. Imagine if I say to you, because they're testing you. When you say it, you failed the test. Now I'm going to say, you're not going to fail the test. You are that highest consciousness right now. You don't need to believe in the hierarchy. You're already there. You just got to believe it. And you've got to believe it to such a degree that it destroys the small mind. It destroys the entanglement of the small emotional feelings. It destroys the mind, and then the feelings are dispersed. Then you're dealing with powers. That's where they got. They got to the powers. They couldn't go any further. So they implemented steps to us because they didn't want us to realize that these powers are available. We destroy those powers. We go into absolute universal mind. That's when we become a universal community. That's when there will be no separation between the prison planet and all of the authors of universal consciousness that live on different parts of the Milky Way. They'll come and say, okay, these guys are ready. But we're not ready if we don't break through this.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is in the way that we've been conditioned to think that everything related to thought and language and specific use of words or whatever these are sharp tools that are used to quantify, measure, weigh. Like we're looking the whole of the way that we interact and communicate in the regular way with each other is defined by something quantifiable and measurable.
And can I cut in there?
Yes.
You said sharp tools.
Yeah.
They're cutting you.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say, is that when I'm practicing Loban Pi, or I'm having experiences outside of that frame, and I'm experiencing something that is just feeling. When you move into a feeling space, there are no sharp edges. It's not really quantifiable in any kind of way. It's an experience that is very real, and in some ways more real, but it's hard to orient yourself inside of that space, really. Certainly not by traditional means, because there are no boundaries inside of that space, and it's just, the only thing I could say to describe it is that there's like a warmth to it, or a sustenance to it, maybe, but it's a comfortable place and space. But then I think it's easy when you're still trying to find that, like you're maybe it's your yi that you're applying to finding those kinds of spaces. You have a tendency to question the realness of it, because you are so entrained to find the sharp edges so that you can start counting things or knowing what you found and being able to describe it to somebody else or something like that.
The sharp angles, I heard somebody say, this isn't my saying, it's either angles or angels. And what he means by angles or angels, angelic attention has got nothing to do with angles or something sharp, which is going to cut into your conscious and lead you to believe that you're wounded to such a degree that you can't progress to an angelic state. God, there was something else I was going to say, but now I forgot. Go ahead, Dad.
Well, that was really the end of the thought, is that I've had experiences inside of feeling spaces, and sometimes I can go there intentionally. Most of the time it's something that just happens, and when you're in that space, you kind of want to hold on to it, because there's so much more sustenance in those quality of experiences than anything. Whether, you know, in the regular world, I think most of the time we're looking for validation, we're looking for acceptance, we're looking for somebody else to define our worth and mirror it back to us, you know, or convince us of it. But when you're in that space, you feel something that is so abundant, that maybe universal mind is something that we can at any stage of our development tap into at moments, maybe not on purpose, but I don't know, it's so noticeable. Like, for instance, conversations with you are an example of this. The first time I had online spiritual guidance with you, there was a qualitative difference between that it didn't even matter what we said. It was just, I felt so like received in that became the new standard of what I wanted from life and relationships with other people, and and became more sensitive to when I wasn't getting that, or when I was getting like the antithesis to that, I would say. So yeah. It's not that I have a point, it's just that it's, when I'm talking about things like the Rosicrucian system is such a long diatribe of like rules and formulas and all of these machinations that are machine-like in so many ways, and while I think there's an aspect to it that's true, you know, when even when you describe your experience of God, it was very mechanized and machine-like. Their math itself is something that is a language outside of our regular framework that seems to tap into universal concepts and primal energies in a way that we don't really understand. Maybe we're just on the precipice of that with quantum physics and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's also just simpler than that. I think that we just don't give enough priority to feeling. That's what I think.
Yeah, but sorry, Dave, I bumped into you because I thought you were finished. I really apologize for that. Now, when you're speaking, I've got a bubble of energy that's gone way beyond even our neighborhood, way beyond the Milky Way. So I'm expanding as you're talking. So within that expansion, what's the difference between the two consciousness in terms of the relevance of realization? Would you have the same realizations if you could expand even into the Milky Way, way beyond our neighborhood? So if I asked you to expand into the Milky Way, would you talk like the way you just spoke? Or would you be so overwhelmed by all the content of information, but not overwhelmed, but comfortable with the fact that you are capable of encompassing this?
Yeah, for sure. I've actually had, we'll call them dreams, but whatever they were, of being in space and surrounded by the vastness of everything. And while there is,
you are space, not being in space. You are space. Yeah.
Yeah, from the perspective of being transplanted into outer space and seeing the galaxies from that vantage point.
No, you weren't transplanted. You have the possibility. So you have the possibility to be beyond that particular. You've got the possibility. Even if I'm in this room, I don't want to sound like a know-it-all or put tickets on myself. I'm not in this room at the moment. I'm elsewhere. But if you're in the room, can you be elsewhere? If you can you see the fundamental three-dimensional illusion and be constantly expanding into a cosmic consciousness that is way beyond the Milky Way, that's billions of light years expanded, and you see yourself as a bubble expanding into those particular extraordinary frequencies that are not governed by a 26,000 or 25,000 year cycle. You release yourself from that cycle. You release yourself from the edifice of the vibration of Jupiter, Mars, and all the planets that are affecting our biosystem. Go somewhere else, get some more experience. Then the experience of our locatable position in terms of where we are in our neighborhood does not apply to our physical framework anymore, because we're elsewhere. So that we can then have a form of entanglement with beings that have already discovered this. So if we want to be integrated, we have to allow them to see that we have discovered this, we've expanded to their position, so there's a form of integration with that, and there's cosmic entanglement in terms of harmonization. But if we stay in our small locale, then we'll have entanglement with our karmic residue. We'll never escape. We've got to go beyond that.
Yeah.
So how would you feel if you had no more emotions, no more worries, no more cares? Who would you be? Where would you be if you had no mind? And what would happen if you could travel beyond 500,000 million light years away from your position? How would that change you? You can't even answer the question because it's so encompassing that you become that. And then this small talk that we're doing on this planet will stop. I'm not saying you're doing small talk. I love you, Dave.
I love you too, though.
Yeah.
Well, it is small talk, and it seems like we're in this weird place where it's getting smaller. That all the social media and the constant barrage of media, giving attention to things that are so just, it's gossip. There's a lot of gossip, and we treat gossip as if it's news now.
Yeah.
I guess what I want to be a takeaway from a conversation like this is for people that are listening to not regard human evolution as something that is too hard, or that they don't know where to start, or that it's, the vastness of the everything is too intimidating to even try to let go of
okay.
the regular experience.
If you can deconstruct your sentence, you can deconstruct what you just said and look at the magic that you just applied to yourself and everybody else. If you can look at the spelling capacity of word usage in terms of how that is a slave language. If we can I don't know whether I can deconstruct it because I don't have a memory mind like this, but if we can deconstruct this and then look at the framework of the words that we're putting out into the world, because in the beginning there was nothing but sound and light, and sound and light is produced by the manifestation of the word. In the beginning there was the word, and the word was infinite. So if the word is then put into a small frame, it's no longer infinite anymore, and that's the spell.
That is the spell. That's the beginning of the Rosicrucian Cosmo conception, and what the whole precept of the book is about. It's
there
about
you go.
God putting himself into a limited frame of experience.
But
and then they try to justify how he's still.
Yeah, but the thing is, the limited frame, people come into this world and they say, I am here to add to the universal consciousness. No, you're here because you're not in harmony. There's no spiritual hierarchy in terms of I'm here to add to the universe. No, you're here because you don't know how to add yourself to the universe. And the people who know the power of this suggestion have captured everybody, and everyone's got this highfalutin idea of themselves instead of being exactly who they're really meant to be. Instead of giving themselves the fantasy that I was born here, I chose this. Wake up, everybody.
Yeah. Do you think that okay, so I'm going to say two things. One is that my wife and I have been going through some things. I'm not sure how much I could share about the specific details of it, but we've come into contact with the
controlling mechanisms that want to put a frame around you that you have to comply to, and you don't want to comply to it because it's mean, it's not right, and you're fighting for your right not to be captured or put into a box that doesn't belong to you. This is happening to everybody.
Yeah.
So, and that box doesn't belong to you. I don't believe that box belongs to you. It's not right. And as long as I can say that's not right, then because you're emotionally entangled, there's a trap. All the legal system, everybody uses it to hurt somebody else, and everybody uses it to protect themselves from someone they're going to be hurt. This is a frame of consciousness we've all got to drop. They say, what is it? The what they say about the equilibrium of the law is blind, or whatever is it? What is it? Justice is blind.
Justice is blind. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's so strange. Justice is not blind. You should be awake to the injustice of the justice system that says this is what we've got to do. It's a framework of control.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. I've had too much coffee.
No, that's the by when you start moving in those spaces, I think the first thing that I felt was the brittleness of that power mechanism, that it requires complicity in order to continue to operate, that the
Yeah.
minute that somebody steps outside and says you don't actually have jurisdiction over my morality, then I'm not going to go along, I'm not going to cooperate with this idea that you have of us, and how we're meant to be, and what spaces we're allowed to occupy or not occupy, or whatever the case may be. It's something that I think once people do wake up, it doesn't actually have real power. It's like the, I mean, obviously there's militaries and governments and things that could cause this amount of harm. I'm not saying that, but but as far as the compliance of populations that are asleep, and that allow these kinds of structures to continue to determine outcomes of our world and our societies, they really are brittle.
We're cooperating with repetition, when that repetition is training us like monkeys to do exactly what we're told, because there are consequences, and we're afraid of those consequences because we need a house over our head, we need to feed ourselves, instead of a united consciousness of the world which cares for every single individual without this happening. And that sounds utopian. No, the prison sounds horrible. Utopian consciousness is where we need to go. We need to care and love for each other without this crap. And nobody should be subject to it. You shouldn't be subject to it. Nobody should be subject to these minor powers and rules, which are low powers, and a convention which is to limit people's possibilities. And it's wrong. Everything has to change. Everything has to change.
Do you think that there's value in like inventorying powers, like the minor powers versus the major powers, and trying to understand the specific ones that exist and operate in our world? Or do you think that that's
Okay, if you inventory powers, the people who have the powers will realize you've inventoried it, and they'll protect themselves from have the exchange to make them be moved from where they are to somewhere where they should be, they could be, where they must be. If you inventory it, you'll get conflict. You'll get somebody fighting against what you're doing. Change our consciousness so they wake up incrementally and say, what have we done? What have we done? To open their heart up enough to actually reveal that their feeling centers do not have the right to control a mass of human beings, and to inventory those massive human beings like batteries into situations that don't belong to them. And nobody knows what they're here for anymore.
Yeah.
And we need to know what we're here for. What is my purpose? What is your purpose? We're occupied with something else. It's a trick. It's a dirty trick. Who are we really meant to be? And until these sort of the lower mind and the lower feelings, everything's subdued into the massive universal consciousness, and the ability to do and be who we're really meant to be, we've been denied this. And when you wake up to this, you don't get infuriated. You just want everybody to be free. And you don't challenge them directly, even though I put this out on the internet now. But you understand, there's got to be a resounding voice to say, I know what I'm doing, but I think this can be done better, because everyone's going to think first. What do you want? What do you really want? I want the ability to actually progress and do what I'm really meant to do, to stop doing what I'm really not meant to do.
I feel that deeply.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm a cat. I'm a cat that's escaped its wet paper bag, and you can't get me back in.
well, I think this has been another wild conversation, and I'm left with just a feeling of gratitude for knowing you, Luhan, and for to be able to have these conversations and share these conversations, and hopefully people get something out of it. Do you have any final words for those that are finding us for the first time?
Yeah, love and cherish the people who love and cherish you. Avoid the people who are jealous of you. Avoid the people who don't want you to achieve. They're more trapped than you are. Family is a person who will stand next to you and say, I love you for who you are. Do the best you can, and let's free ourselves from this and become way more than what is happening to all of us.
That's good.
Be good people. Be loving people. Be kind people. But be smart. But don't be dumb smart. Be smart.
Yeah, we can do a whole another episode on what dumb smart is.
Well, dumb smart is our reality. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's all organized to keep us trapped. That's dumb smart. It's extremely smart. It's an expression of power, but it's the wrong expression of universal law. It is a controlling power. We don't need these controlling powers in our life. We need the power of the universe, and to sustain ourselves within our own ability to say, I can achieve this, I can do this, I'm godlike, I can reach into the cosmos. Not just walk out your front door down to the shop.
Thank you all for joining us. This has been another amazing conversation with Luhan Matus. We hope you continue to come back and check us out. Our online community is ready. It's ready for launch. So in the coming weeks, we're going to invite a small group to test it out and let us know what they think. And then after that, you'll all be welcome. So lots of love to everybody that's tuned in. Like, subscribe, share, do all the things that help the channel. And we'll catch you next time.